Hello, welcome, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's Foundations Live. I'm Paul from Foundations, and today's all about behaviours of concern. So I guess this afternoon we've got Diane from the who's an occupational therapist who'll be giving us a case study towards the end of the afternoon. Got Coral from the Challenging Behaviours Foundation and Mark, who's one of our regional advisors here at Foundations. They'll be talking through some of the resources that we've developed and some of the resources that are available more widely around behaviours of concern. So we'll see all of them in a few moments' time.
Foundations Live!
So just before we start, a few bits and pieces as usual. So Foundations is the national body for home improvement agencies and the Disabled Facilities Grant in England, and we're funded by the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. So we're here to support you with anything DFG related. If you're looking for closed captions this afternoon, they're available on social media. So as well as on the Foundation's website, we stream live to LinkedIn, Facebook, on YouTube. So if you're looking for any closed captions, they're all available there. The whole webinar is recorded and available on demand on our website afterwards, and it's also available on Facebook, YouTube and LinkedIn afterwards as well. So if you want to catch up or share it with any colleagues, then you can do it from there. As usual, the comments box is open, so please feel free to say hello, tell us where you're from, and what's the weather like near you. I mean, it's just south of Manchester here, and it's absolutely chucking it down. So yeah, what's the weather? What's the weather like near you? A few bits and pieces just to keep you up to date with what's happening. So the National Healthy Housing Award nominations are now open. So that's the our annual awards. We get together in Manchester and give out the awards in December, and there's a range of categories including Home Improvement Agency of the Year, DFG Team of the Year, Technical Officer, Handy Person, Caseworker, Technical Officer. I think I've said Technical Officer, but there's 9 different categories where you can nominate either people or teams for an award. And one of the things we've added this year is an awards AI agent. So if you want a little bit of help in terms of crafting the best possible entry, perhaps you've never used AI before, it might be your first opportunity to do so. So please head over to Foundation's website and find all the details to enter this year's awards. And also coming up are the DFG Champions Roadshows, so our autumn run of roadshows, where we'll be visiting Southampton. Then we move on to, scroll across the screen, on to Wolverhampton, then on to Liverpool, up to Sheffield, or across Sheffield, and then down to London in October. And as usual, if you haven't been to a roadshow before, where have you been? But it's got all the usual quizzes, songs, exhibitors, and we've got 3 sessions where we will be talking about high cost adaptations in the first session. In the final session of the day, we'll be talking about trusted assessors and the role of trusted assessors in the DFG process. And in the middle section, we'll be looking at some of the things we've been developing over the last few months, including the DFG Champions board game, which is kind of a brand new game that we've developed to help kind of local authorities and people involved with the DFG process to kind of work through cases, improve systems, look at where there's bottlenecks, what happens if things go wrong. So if you come along to the roadshows, you'd be amongst the first people in the world to play the DFG Champions board game. So before we start with our speakers of the day, just a reminder that the comments box, you can ask any questions, and I'll be posing some of those as we go through the afternoon to the various speakers. And I will also round up any at the end if we've got a bit of time left to cover any more of your questions. So I think that's all the introductions. So now I'm going to hand over to Mark Pearce, who's Regional Advisor for Foundations for the East of England and East Midlands, and has been heavily involved with developing a new guide that we're publishing today, which the link will be in the comments. So over to you, Mark, to introduce this afternoon's session.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. And it does give me great pleasure to actually finally be at this point where we can release the resource and design guide. A little bit of the history is we've had a working group who you'll hear from Coral in a bit, from the Challenging Behaviour Foundation, and other organisations have been involved in trying to understand what it is we need in the sector, what the issues are. And obviously, as a regional advisor, we often get asked certain questions. And from a personal point of view, from my background coming from health and social care, I was slightly worried we were beginning to, if you like, create mini cages in people's homes. And, you know, a gilded cage is still a cage. So it was trying to explore what resources could be available to make people look at the problem slightly differently, take a much wider approach, I guess, rather than just putting a lock on a door and trying to keep somebody, if you like, contained or restrained. And that's really not what adaptations are for. So the working group, we went through a lot of iterations and talking around what was required. We produced a survey which went out to everybody working in the field to look at what types of products, solutions, interventions were being used. We started then to produce a guide, and I have to say at that point it was rather unwieldy. It was probably 70 pages long, and we then got a set of students involved in a project to look at it, and we got some feedback, and we kind of got to the final iteration. And I have to say it's been an absolute pain to get to this point, but an absolute pleasure as well. And the pleasure comes from seeing people where you can have an interaction. They can consider some options around the individual and actually look past it just being an adaptation, but look at the wider picture. And some of what came through in the guide is actually core design principles that may be useful for people to refer to, but most importantly, are very person-centered and individualized. I think the aim of the guide has always been that adaptations will remove barriers and create opportunities for people to thrive. And often we will see that actually the thriving element isn't necessarily there. And of course, we've had Rachel Russell, most of you will probably know, oversees or chairs the Behaviour of Concern practitioner group. And they're also producing a lot of case studies that will feed into this guide as well, which just detail working together, working in a joined up way, and some of the solutions that can come out of some really good design principles and adaptations that aim to get the best out of an individual. And one of the greatest thing and the strengths, I think, of the guide is it focuses on a very personalized approach. So you've got your personalized approach looking at the individual, looking at the strengths-based focus of that individual. So what strengths has that individual got? When we're looking at behaviors, it's often on the negative aspects, and there can often be two sides to that. There can be the strengths that actually, if we keep somebody engaged and independent in their own home, does that minimize some of the behavior? Is that able to give them the next stage, which is supporting their autonomy to be independent in their own home, which, as you will all know, the principle of the DFG is to keep people independent in their own homes for as long as possible, and certainly around behaviours of concern, looking at supporting that autonomy for as long as possible. And one that I know that I think Coral will also mention in her presentation will be respecting the lived experience, listening to people. Families will often be frustrated when they're sort of coming down, looking at an adaptation for a behavior of concern. But actually they've got a lot of information and a lot of knowledge, and they need to be engaged, and engaged in a really positive way that gets the best for them, for the person who requires the adaptation, and actually just listening as well, because sometimes there will be clues within that there might be other interventions that are working that can be considered. So actually taking that lived experience from the family point of view is really, really important. What we've tried to do within the guide is pull together some useful resources. So there's a lot of structure within the guide. When you have the link, you'll be able to go through it. And it's links to other organizations where you can find out further information. There's links to information on products that are, it's not a recommended product in the sense, but it's this looking at the solutions for certain design adaptations that you might need. And that can be sort of thumb locks. It can be a whole range of different things, from soundproofing to lighting. There's all sorts of areas for consideration. And ultimately, it's about taking a much more multidisciplinary approach to delivering adaptations that are going to be successful. In the role as regional advisor, one of the issues that we often have is an adaptation looked at in isolation. So somebody is, for example, jumping up and down on floorboards. Rather than looking at the bigger issue, they're just fixing the floorboards, and the person will go back. And once the floorboards are fixed, the behavior will continue. And so there's lots of examples where actually sometimes the approach is quite blinkered. It doesn't look at actually how do we manage that or move that forward or make it a much more positive behavior or encourage a behavior in a different way. So much more of a multidisciplinary approach is really important for delivering really good positive outcomes that sort of empower the individual to have a much more independent and autonomous life, and autonomous within their means as well, so as autonomous as they can be. We are looking at a whole range of things within the guide as well, and I'll just run through some of them. I won't go through it in huge detail, but you're looking at creating supportive and predictable home environments. So somewhere that feels safe for somebody, it's predictable, and it can be the exact same thing over and over again in terms of repetition and maintaining that. Supporting sensory needs through adaptations as well. So to try and create much calmer environments, adaptations that might support communication, which can have a wider context in terms of that person's autonomy and independence. Probably one that we are seeing more and more within foundations is the safe spaces for physical distress, where somebody is physically in distress and they are smashing or wanting to smash things. So safe spaces for that. Environmental adaptation for sensory needs. So yeah, again, you're looking at lighting and the soundproofing. Structured environment for routine difficulties. So sometimes it's about creating an environment that's very structured. You know what the behavior is going to be, and it's creating that environment that tries to minimize as much as possible. Looking at sort of safety and safety in terms of technical safety for movement and exploration. So a lot of movement sensors. You can wear monitors now. You can have all sorts of assistive technology that allows for a certain amount of movement and exploration, rather than putting a lock on a door and keeping a containment. We've got an element on there in sort of climbing safely. Some behaviors of people like to climb or abscond, and so looking at how you might encourage that and encouraging safe climbing, or adaptations that might encourage safe climbing. We've got environmental adaptations for self-regulation needs, so what that person might need in terms of their own well-being, and yet again, it's about engaging with the family and getting that understanding for the wider picture and some of the considerations that need to be in there. There is a section on food and eating, which obviously comes into its own. There are behaviors around food and eating that might need to be addressed. Yet again, it's not looking at any of these in isolation. It's trying to work together in a very kind of multidisciplinary approach to creating that safe environment where somebody can thrive. And it's not always about trying to get the right solution at the right time. It's considering what might need to be looked at as part of the guide, what can be called upon, what resources are there to support that. And I think it's a really, personally have been really pleased to be involved in the process of getting the guide to this point, and pleased from that personal point of view of actually giving people the information to make much more informed adaptations that meet the needs of the individual, as opposed to creating, as I said, mini environments that might be more containment. It's about giving somebody a quality of life within the DFG framework, within the adaptation that meets their needs, that allows them to thrive. And I think that's probably the biggest message that I can take out of the guide. It is about that individualization, putting the person at the center, but also considering what resources and support are needed to consider what can make a real positive environment. So I really hope that you certainly go and have a look at the guide, get a sense for what the guide is trying to promote. And it really, if the guide does half of what we intend it to do, then it will be very successful, and we'll be very proud of that, because it will make a huge impact on people's lives. And with that, hopefully it's given you enough appetite to go and have a look through the guide and see what we've produced. But it now gives me great pleasure to hand over to Coral from the Challenging Behaviour Foundation. He's just going to talk around it more from the, I guess, the family perspective and the wider perspective. Coral.
Thanks, Mark. Hello, everyone. So I'm Coral. I'm from the Challenging Behaviour Foundation. So if we move over to the next slide, just for people that don't know, the Challenging Behaviour Foundation is a small national charity that supports the families of children, young people and adults who have severe learning disabilities and behaviours described as challenging. We provide information and advice, including having a helpline, and we have resources for families and professionals. And additionally, we work with partners to share best practice and influence policy. Now, I'm going to quickly whip over a bit about terminology, because we were always asked why we use the term behaviours that challenge. I'm on the slide before, sorry. So very quickly, why we use the term behaviours that challenge. Challenging behaviour has a formal definition that is recognised in academia, and we use it because it's a term that recognises that it's not the person that is challenging, but the systems and services are being challenged. And many of our families that we are in contact with are aware of this term, so they find it easier to access information and resources. And I know there's lots of different terminology for the similar things out there, but this is the one that we're using. So moving on, why we were interested to be involved in this piece of work and why we saw it as important. So the families that we work with really feel that adaptations matter for their relatives with severe learning disabilities and behaviours that challenge for a number of reasons. Obviously, adaptations can help ensure that the person's environment meets the needs of that person, and that's both in a sort of helping, if we get sort of their sensory needs right, then those behaviours of challenges can reduce. But also, if someone's exhibiting behaviours that sort of can be harmful, such as pica or head banging, getting things in place such as covering corners with soft coverings, things like that are helpful. Adaptations can create an environment that better meets the person's needs and can prevent behaviours escalating to the point that the person reaches a crisis. And we know in the case where someone has a learning disability whose behaviour challenges, that if their living situation can break down, they can end up being detained in a hospital under the Mental Health Act. And families shared their worries about this, and that because there's nowhere else often for their family members to go, and being in an inpatient unit can cause significant harm and trauma. We know that one of the biggest reasons that people with a learning disability are delayed from discharge from getting out of those environments is that the lack of suitable housing is available. Just to quote, really, in June this year, lack of suitable housing was the factor in 48% of delayed discharge. So making adaptations to housing that can be suitable can help facilitate discharge and stop people with a learning disability and autistic people spending such long times in hospital, and we know at the moment the average length of stay is over 4.5 years. So moving on, so I've just run through why families that we're in contact with felt adaptations are so important and were keen to be involved in this work. And families we're in contact with were keen to input into how adaptations are used to support their relatives. So that's how we sort of came. That's a bit of the background of how we came involved. One of the key messages around adaptations that families we're in contact with shared is the importance of working in partnership. And I'm sure we'd all agree with the quote here that the most effective way to ensure success for both professionals and families is to work together on an equal basis. And I've just put our QR code on that slide there with some further information about co-production with families. So moving on, thank you. So improving partnership working, we can achieve greater equality, mutual respect and satisfaction, as well as a more efficient use of everyone's time. We can create a positive, empowering and supportive relationship with everyone working together towards the same goals. And most importantly, we should achieve better outcomes for the person with learning disabilities and challenging behaviour. Some of the things that are needed in partnership work, and I've just sort of listed there. None of these would be a big surprise. Honest and open communication, accept the challenges each other faces, acknowledge each other's expertise. And we know that families bring a whole host of expertise. They've been the main source of love, care and support for their relatives throughout their lives, know their relatives well. Sometimes professionals can come and go, but the family is the sort of key member that's consistent and there. Providing accessible information that's jargon-free, considering families' other commitments and arranging meetings that are at a suitable time, date and venue. Respecting individuals' differences in culture and religion, including family carers and relatives in training, and keeping communication channels open if you disagree. Some of these take some time, but they make the biggest difference, as we know. So moving on. The other key message that families shared around ensuring adaptations meet their relatives' needs is the acknowledgement that adaptations are just one part of the solution. So adaptations need to be seen as one part of a wider system for the supporting the person. People with severe learning disabilities don't display behaviours that challenge for no reason. And in many cases, they're communicating that their needs aren't being met. This could be because their home environment isn't right, or it could be due to other factors. For example, they're not being supported to take part in activities that they enjoy, or they have health needs that are not being met. So adaptations can help address needs to improve needs at home to improve their quality of life, and they can reduce the impact the behaviours that challenge. But if the reason that the person is displaying that behaviour is due to something else, adaptations alone won't be enough. Families obviously know their relatives well, and while the professionals involved in supporting their relative can change, which can make it difficult to ensure the knowledge about the person is retained, families know their relatives' entire history and can be aware of wider factors, not just the home environment. So working with the family can help identify what adaptations are needed to improve the home environment, but also whether there are other factors that need to be considered. And the multidisciplinary team involved in supporting the person can also help to identify whether there are other needs are not related just to the home environment that needs addressing, and then work to address these, such as if there's mental health or physical issues that need to be addressing alongside changes in the environment. So if behaviours that challenge are caused by factors that aren't the home environment, that doesn't mean that adaptations aren't needed to support the person. Adaptations can help reduce the impact of the behaviour on the person and keep them safe. But it does mean that it needs to be just part of one part of the system to support that person, and there's other parts of the solution that needs to be thought about. So moving on here at the CBF, if we can have the next slide, please. Here at the CBF, we have sort of some resources and ways that we can help support professionals and families around adaptations. So we have a Challenging Behaviour National Strategy Group, which some people might be aware of, which brings together people from different backgrounds, including families, to share knowledge, share best practice and collectively address issues. So, and one of the things that we have considered as part of that group is around housing and adaptations. We also have our professional email network, which is a forum that anyone can join for professionals to ask for advice and get it from people doing the same job as them, but other people also with relevant expertise and involved in that sort of and interested in that piece of work, and can put input, so you can get sort of share ideas and get help with suggestions on things. And we also have a number of resources on our website. So we have resources specifically around specialist equipment and safety adaptations. So our website's up on there, so do take a look. Thank you very much. I hope that's helpful. And I shall pass on back over to Paul.
Great. Thank you, Coral. I mean, it kind of struck me that a lot of the things that you were saying kind of applies pretty much good practice, almost regardless of whether it's a kind of behaviour concern or a challenging behaviour. It kind of applies for most people in most situations, I guess. So do you kind of get frustrated that that's sometimes not the case, or what's your kind of view on how I suppose kind of interactions with families usually run?
We do find families are often involved a few stages too late as well. So getting families involved really early on is really important. Right at the initial stages, having early conversations with families. Families have a whole host of stuff to bring to the table, and recognise that, and spending the time it's sort of investing that time at the beginning can save a lot of time further down the line.
Yes, yeah. I mean, we had a kind of session on having kind of conversations with families at a recent summit that we held, and one of the things that kind of struck me from the kind of presenter was she was saying that quite often kind of professionals say mom and dad rather than using the kind of parents' names, and she kind of felt that was really important in terms of speaking at kind of the same level. Would you kind of agree with that?
Absolutely. I think I think it's really important, and it's not always just parents, is it? It's sometimes siblings. We do quite a lot of work at the Challenge Behaviour Foundation with their siblings, heavily involved in sort of the relatives and supporting relatives, especially some of the older siblings that are still at home.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Just kind of, I suppose, kind of comment there in terms of the kind of timing of it, and yes, I suppose kind of what you're saying in terms of getting in there early enough to kind of make a difference before kind of turns into a kind of firefighting exercise.
Absolutely. I think that's it's really important, isn't it?
Great. Well, thank you, Coral. If you're okay to hang around a little bit, I think we'll probably have more questions as we move through the afternoon. But thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Foundations Live.
Okay, so I'm back off holiday today, so a lot of today's webinar is as new to me as it is to you. But next up, we have Heather. Hi, Heather. Who's a children's OT manager from Blackburn, and has been involved with our network group on community of practice on behaviours of concern. Before we dive into that, do you want to just give a little intro in terms of your role at Blackburn, Heather?
Yeah, so I'm the children's OT manager at Blackburn Down Council. So our team cover the equipment and adaptations aspect of the occupational therapy service in the area, and then we've got a health team that we work alongside. So I've been attending this group since it started, I think, and it's been great for me coming into this post and having that support.
Excellent. So can you tell us a little bit about the community of practice and what the benefits have been for you to be part of it?
Yeah, so as I was preparing for this, I wrote a list because I thought I don't want to forget anything that's really important. So I'm going to go through my list, and
okay,
there were just so many things, really. I suppose, I can go on and on forever, really. But the main things, I suppose, are that we're able to access a wealth of experience from our colleagues and other practitioners working in other areas, which has been an amazing opportunity, really, for learning. It feels like the space is a reflective, a supervision space where we can come together, ask questions, support one another with difficult cases. It's connected people like from right across the country. So whereas before you might have felt like maybe a couple of years ago, before everybody started doing things online more, you would feel quite isolated in your area, or you might just join up with somebody, in the next town every now and again. But now we've just got that access to other people across the country. which really gives you a broad understanding of how different areas do it differently. So that's certainly been a benefit to me. When I came into this post a couple of years ago, I had mainly done, most of my career has been in adult services, and I moved into children's. And of course, with the increase in these types of referrals for behaviours of concern, everybody's starting to see more of this type of work coming through. But it was certainly something that I needed to upskill on quickly and learn. And without having that opportunity to kind of go through all those case trial and errors yourself and all those cases, we get the benefit of that from the group, because there's so much shared learning in terms of case studies, what people have tried before and what's not worked. So I feel like we're just a period of accelerated learning where you could just jump ahead a little bit and say, well, we know that doesn't work because such a body from Birmingham said it last week. They've already done it or whatever. So it's been useful for that. We've shared loads of resources as well between the people that have been on the group. People have been really willing to share like paperwork, risk assessments, information leaflets that's already been done. So everybody's not reinventing the wheel all the time. Learning how other services are set up in different areas. So who's got learning disability team, who has an autism team, who has different services that can support, and how do they get through these cases? Have I missed anything? Just to say that the space is actually really, it's non-judgmental and no question's a silly question. And there's a full range of experience there from people with lots of different backgrounds, some that are new to this area, some that have been doing it for a long time. And it feels like somewhere that you can just ask a question if you're not sure and get an answer really quickly. You've always got the forum to fall back on when there's not a meeting. So again, people can post questions, and everybody is just a really wonderful community, really, of support.
Good. I mean, that's really good. I mean, it's one of a number of networks that we run. I think the Behaviours and Concern group is probably the most active. And if Dan, if you could pop a link to the network in the chat for people to join. But there are other networks there for kind of technical officers, OTs, different regions of the country, as well as behaviours of concern. So, but in terms of this particular group, Heather, are there any kind of particular things that you've kind of learned or has kind of fed into your daily work at Blackburn?
Yeah, so certainly a knowledge of products around behaviours of concern. We've shared a lot of information on that between ourselves when we've talked about different cases. So things like window protectors, radiator covers. There's been things about fences and locks, and it's been good because often an OT will know what they need to do. They might know what the solution is, but they might not have ever found a product before, and they don't want to get it wrong because we're all stretched for time. We want to do it right first time. So we can say, oh, we found this. Is this something that's will be useful? And somebody else will say, well, actually, we tried that and it didn't work for us because, you know, it broke after 6 months. So maybe you could try this. This works really well, or this is a bit cheaper. So we've had that. Again, the case studies, I know we're probably going to talk about some case studies later, so I'll give some examples, but the case studies have been brilliant learning opportunities, really. And in particular, what I've learned about is how sometimes we can put things in too quickly. And that can just mean that if the behaviour's not been fully understood, that actually it might trigger some other behaviours that you're then dealing with. So it's really taking the time to explore all those other options. So the good thing is that people will share where things haven't gone quite as well, or where they've learned from and going to adjust. And again, it means that not everybody has to go through the same pain. We're all learning from each other. Yeah, the importance of MDT working and your collaborative decision making, what's just been mentioned earlier, and just how we all know it's important, but having that backup to say, actually, you shouldn't be making these decisions on your own. It should be a team decision for a lot of the things that we're talking about, especially when it comes to restrictive practice. And just making sure as well, it is a DFG group after all, that we're working within the legislation. And when we need to go outside of that and look at different options. So it keeps us on track, I think. That's the main learning for me.
So, I mean, I guess kind of the majority of DFGs are still kind of showers, stair lifts and ramps. So that this, in terms of the overall program is still a minority, but I think it can be one of the kind of most challenging areas to deliver DFGs within. You kind of mentioned case studies, Heather. Are there any kind of particularly stood out for you as kind of interesting case studies that have been discussed by the group?
So there's been a few. We had one just a few weeks ago. I don't know if Rachel's on the call, but it was one that generated a lot of discussion, shall we say. And our team brought that particular case study. And it was a family that we wanted to provide some downstairs facilities for, but they were really keen to keep the dining room space. And I think historically in DFG world, we've always been told or steered to use that second reception room or that dining room to create a bedroom downstairs. And we know the DFG doesn't cover the purpose of creating a dining room. So we're like, right, let's find out what everybody feels about this and what other areas would do. What do they think is important in terms of, should we be keeping that dining room space? 'Cause it's actually really important for this family. Should we be extending? That's going to cost more money. And where does everybody sit with that? So that was a really interesting discussion, because it really just showed to me that we didn't come to a conclusion at the end. There was no unanimous decision, but it showed that everybody's got all these different views that could input into it, and actually just showing that you've been through this process of considering all the different aspects of a case. You've had that team support and everybody's input around legislation, guidance, best practice. You're able to come up and formulate a plan. So that was a really good one. We've also talked about one where there was a child that was really unsafe on the stairs, and they were doing a lot of spinning behaviours. And in reality, it was probably a case that we could have worked with that child, or somebody, a team could have worked with that child, the family, to maybe address those behaviours. But in this particular case, the family had 5 other siblings, the child had 5 other siblings, and the reality was mum was never, a single parent, mum was never going to be able to do that. So what do we do about that? And it was all about downstairs living. There was another case that somebody else brought, which I certainly learned a lot from myself, because it was more from a sensory perspective. And it was an OT that was looking at a bathroom adaptation. I can't remember all the details, but the summary of it was, I think that they couldn't, the child didn't want to go into the bathroom at home, but would go into the grandma's bathroom, which was a lot bigger. So we thought that it would probably needed to have a bigger bathroom at home. But somebody on the call had a lot of experience in sensory work. And they were saying, well, first of all, it might be that grandma's bathroom's just got more frilly things in, more towels, less hard surfaces. And these are some of the things that you can try first. And that really stuck with me for some of the other cases that we've been able to apply it to at work. So there are 3 interesting ones, I think.
Yeah. And it sounds like you've kind of perhaps come away with different points of view after the meeting compared to maybe what you went in with before.
Definitely, yeah.
And I mean, from your perspective, Heather, is there kind of anything that you'd like the kind of group to cover or kind of develop in the future? And anything that would be particularly useful for you on top of what it's doing already?
So a couple of ideas that I had, just based on how useful I've found it from a supervision point of view and supporting being able to access that resource. One thing that I thought would be good is if there was a more formal supervision platform, maybe that people could join and bring shared cases, especially people that might be working in smaller teams, or there's quite a few OTs that seem to just be working on their own in isolation. And it would be good if they didn't have to wait for the next group, they could just go and discuss. So that was an idea. And again, I think you're probably kind of working on that with some of the things you're doing, but some of the documentation that we've shared between ourselves, it'd be really good if there was a standard for certain things that not everybody would have to necessarily buy into, but if it was on the platform somewhere where there were some information leaflets that you could give out to your service users, children, family, adults, whoever it is, with the little logo on of Foundations, this is an official document that we've got, and maybe some assessment tools as well. That would be great.
Great, thank you. So for those of you that are interested in joining the community practice, if you scroll a little bit back up the comments feed, you'll find the links there. If you've got a gov.uk email address, it lets you straight in. Otherwise, we just can check you first, make sure you're not some sort of rogue person coming in and joining the group, infiltrating the group. So there's kind of two elements to it, as kind of Heather was saying. There's like kind of an online forum where you can make posts and get people to kind of comment and feedback, which is, I suppose, kind of similar in some ways to the DFG Champions Facebook group, if you're already a member of that. But we also have, I think every 2 or 3 months, there's an online meeting where the group we get together and discuss particular topics. I think there kind of are options to maybe kind of have a open forum every so often as well. So yeah, we will look into that as well. There are a couple of questions. There seems to be quite a discussion about AstroTurf going on in the chats. We may come back to that a little bit later, but for now, Heather, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Foundations Live.
Right. So now I'm going to welcome Diane, who's spoken before, one of our roadshows, but Diane's got a case study for us. So over to you, Diane.
Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for asking me to come along today. Really, really interesting, some interesting discussions, and also in the chat. And my case study today is actually somebody who's an older adult. Though I would echo what previous people have said, is we are seeing increasing numbers of people coming through, young people, where we're having to look really carefully at home environments. But I'm an OT working in a mental health learning disability team. And until about 5 or 6 years ago, I had very little experience of housing at all. So in some ways, this is brilliant timing for me and some of my colleagues, because it's something we are increasingly looking at, as I think that statistic was really shocking, wasn't it? Was it 48% of discharges are delayed because of housing issues, which is truly terrible, really. But I wanted to talk about a gentleman I've been working with who's in his 70s, actually, with a learning disability, autism, and a diagnosis of pica. And I don't know if everybody knows that, but pica is basically the ingestion of non-edible items. And he's been living in his own ground floor flat, which is part of a supported living service, for over 27 years, but with very, very specialised support. And there are services that are almost attached to our trust. So there's good access to a range of other health professionals as part of that. And unfortunately, sorry, I nearly left then. He had a period last year of being in hospital, in a mainstream hospital with pneumonia for about, I think he was in hospital about over 6 months in the end, because it was found on X-ray that he wasn't recovering in the community to antibiotics. And when they did the X-ray, they realised he had actually ingested, I think it was a 5-pence piece that was lodged in his lungs. And some of the other things that we were seeing was just increased frailty, becoming older, finding just everyday tasks more difficult, needing more support. His mobility was decreasing, and just basic functional skills, we were seeing a decline, really. And when he was in hospital, there was a lot of discussion at that time about whether or not this was the time, mainly social services were looking at this, whether or not he should be returning to his own flat, or whether or not it was time to look at him moving to more residential care, really, where there would be more staff around, possibly somewhere with nursing support. And one of the things we looked at, we developed a tool locally some time ago called the Safe Home Environment Assessment. And we looked at this in terms of what were the risks about him going home to his own home, where he'd been very happy, very settled, very few incidents actually in the latter few years, and where he had really, really skilled support. And I think one of the earlier speakers mentioned, Coral might have been, that we have to look at, it's not just always sometimes the physical environment. If we'd have gone to the residential care option, it could have been, we could have made, more, we could have had a slightly more easier to manage physical environment. But what we would have lost was the skilled staff who were around him, and that really constituted what we thought was like a capable environment for this gentleman. And he had staff working with him. He didn't actually have family. Most of his families had died or weren't around anymore, but some of the staff team had known him over 20 years, and they were really brilliant actually at advocating and knowing him really, really well. So when we looked at the risks within his environment, they were brilliant in actually being able to very quickly identify what we could do within his existing flat to make it more like to future-proof it really. And because it was one of those big Victorian houses that was carved up many years ago, it was looking very tired and was no longer meeting his needs. And part of that was because I think he had very poor tolerance of people going into his environment. Even doing things like decorating was hugely traumatic for him, actually. But following admission to hospital, we really looked very closely at what could we do within his actual flat to make it a safer place for him to return to, rather than looking at him having a really, really traumatic transition to a completely new setting, but with staff who wouldn't know him as well as his existing staff team did. And as you can see, this is just a picture of his bathroom at the moment. One of the, it does look very tired, doesn't it? So he had a perpetual issue of tearing off toilet seats, and the staff team had tried loads and loads of quite innovative things to kind of manage this behaviour. But one of the real concerns was, one, functionally, it wasn't very nice him sitting on this toilet without a toilet seat. But every time they replaced it, it got pulled off. And there was a real concern around the screws and the risk of him ingesting these like bits of the toilet seat, because I think they were found he also had bits of plastic in his stomach when he was in hospital. So one of the things we did was, this has come about at really brilliant timing for us, because we were looking at how could we do these adaptations, and fortunately have very, very good local housing OTs who have tons of expertise around DFGs, who we managed to speak to, and together, actually, and I think that's true, it's about the collaboration, isn't it, of us really knowing him really well, but them really understanding the processes. And this isn't a before and after. This is kind of what we're aiming for. We've gone for an integral toilet, similar to what you might actually see in a hospital, because it's referred to as ligature resistant. But the idea, it's an integral one, all-in-one system. So there's nothing to pull off. There's no bits, there's no screws. And then looking very much at a very standard adaptation, actually, in terms of DFGs, looking at just putting in a level access shower. But also this bathroom has no windows. It's very kind of dark. It's in the middle of the flat, really. It's looking at, well, what can we do around the sensory aspects of this to make it a nicer environment for him, so that we can actually support his independence within his own home for much longer, and also reduce the need for the staff having to go and support him, because at the moment he's really struggling to get in and out of the bath. And I'd already tried before his admission we've done the bath boards, we did the bath seat, none of those he really tolerated. But when he was in hospital, he actually managed to tolerate the shower. So we kind of thought, well, that seems to be the next logical step really for us. And this is kind of an example of us working more collaboratively, sharing our skills, and us understanding some of the sensory elements of behaviour, having access obviously to the whole of the MDT, which is obviously a massive advantage, but then working with local experts like our housing OTs who have been brilliant, because they came up with loads of things we hadn't even considered, such as how we're going to manage the work, how we're going to do this, how long would the work likely take, how to facilitate people going in and getting the quotes done. There was a whole load of planning we've had to do around even where's he going to be living while we do this work. And they were really good because they'd had all their skills and experience of having done this many, many times before and knowing kind of what can go wrong. So that's what we kind of did. We looked at the DFG as being a really good funding opportunity, because we weren't even sure how we were going to even get the funds to do this. It's enabled him to live in his own home for a longer period with all those familiar and skills support, future-proofing it so we can actually think about, as his skills are deteriorating, we've been able to kind of think about making sure we can maintain his independence for as long as possible. And also reducing the risk of another really lengthy and traumatic hospital admission by making sure that we've almost gone through and thought of every possible risk we can see in the environment in terms like kitchen. We've had to put in restrictions, but that's going through court of protection in terms of looking at what the least restrictive options are. But some that we've had to do, like locking fridges, actually, which was something we hadn't had to do before. And also it's been a really great opportunity to work more collaboratively with our local housing OTs. And that's been helpful in terms of kind of looking at some of the cases that they're getting through, which are younger people, which we're now thinking, how do we, we start to work with people when they're 19, but we've actually had a few cases recently where we've gone down a bit to kind of do a bit of preventative work, where we've come across people who are really struggling with, their families are really struggling, and working more collaboratively as a broader system, actually, which seems like totally sensible. And like somebody said, it saves so much time and distress to everybody if we can be a bit more pragmatic about this sometimes. And we've learned lots of skills that we didn't have as OTs working in learning disabilities in terms of what's possible. The community of practice, I would echo, has been brilliant. And I think it is that idea that we can all bring our different skills and expertise and share that in a kind of open way in terms of what works and what doesn't. And I think that was pretty much all what I wanted to say. But the Good Practice Guide is a really brilliant initiative in terms of kind of helping people work through that process. And so I look forward to reading it in more detail as well. So that's all I was going to say, really. It's a very short case study. So.
Great. Thank you, Dan. But I think kind of really useful for bringing out some of the points that we've kind of already discussed and kind of touched on this afternoon, kind of given a bit of flavour in what it means in real life. But I noticed that there's 2 or 3 questions that have come up in the kind of comments that have been having quite a bit of conversation around. So I'll bring back Mark and Heather, and then I'll see if you've got a kind of consensus, which may or may not be the case, I guess, on this sort of case. But let's bring back Mark and Heather, and we'll have a look at some of these questions.
Foundations Live.
There we go. Got everyone back together. Right. So the first one was from Lorraine, where the parents wanted garden excavated, grass replaced with AstroTurf, etc., etc. And any thoughts from any of you in terms of use of AstroTurf instead of grass in a garden? And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer because there's been quite a lot of discussion. Yeah, but any thoughts?
I saw the turf wars in the chat, so to speak.
Yeah.
So it was kind of the argument for and against. The one answer I think I saw in there that I really like, which is kind of person-centered, is more edible plants. So it's creating an environment that's still a garden that maybe allows some exploration but doesn't cause any risk. Also, ultimately, somebody else has just put in chat rubberized floor in terms. I'm not sure if it's in relation to that or it's often just exploring it. I don't think there is. I mean, personally, I wouldn't want to rip it up and put AstroTurf down for a variety of reasons, but it's creating a space that actually the person can utilise as best they can. But
I think also, I suppose, clinically, I'd be wondering what's driving the behaviour. Have they got a formal diagnosis of something like pica? Because it might be there's other strategies that we need to be exploring alongside adaptations. And I think Coral mentioned that, didn't she? It's that kind of person-centered approach about what's driving that behaviour as well. Is it sensory seeking? Is it pica? It could be a multitude of things that would need to be considered alongside kind of what you can do to minimise that as well.
I was just going to say as well about finding out what the person's like in other environments, like you've just said about your experience of them using a shower in hospital, and then all of a sudden that could become a solution. So I'd be interested to see what what they're like on other flooring in different places.
Cool.
And interesting, just to follow on from what Heather said, because it just prompted me there, is actually when especially for children, sometimes asking what they do at school often gives you the answer. So at school, they run out on the playground and play with everybody else, but at home, like you say, the same environment brings about different behavior. So what is it behind the home environment that might be different to the other environment? And sometimes asking the question can just begin to have a conversation. So it was one we had where it was actually the behavior doesn't happen at school, but it does happen at home. So is there something that needed to be unlocked?
I think it says in the chat, it's the same everywhere. So and they're on a waiting list, which I'm afraid is the sad reality, isn't it, for a lot of people at the moment. There's an awful lot of people sat on waiting list, waiting for assessment.
Okay, next question was around lots of water use in the bathroom, punching walls, furniture, lots of issues. And anybody want to dive in on this one?
It's always difficult because sometimes you only get bits of information about what it is, and is it that if actually they've got their own bathroom, then the behaviour reduces. So I, as with anything, when I look at it, it's sometimes there's not enough information to make an informed kind of decision, as it were. And in this, it'd be like, yeah, I'd probably need a little bit more detail to be able to understand why. But
yeah, and again, it's linking in with those other people. I'm sure that's happened already, but making sure you've got the advice from the people who are experts on their OCD. Have they had any input with that before? And how has that helped? Because we know that sometimes you can just shift the problem somewhere else, can't you? And actually, if they've still got all those anxieties with their OCD, that it's likely to come out in another way.
Great. Thank you for that one.
I think it's a nice example of what you were saying, Heather, about having a forum where you can bring case studies and there's more time to kind of have those kind of conversations, isn't it, in the round?
Yeah, back and forth a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. One from Kev. What age should we be looking at a child with behaviours of concern? Can they grow into or out of certain behaviours?
I would say, from experience of working with younger adults, behaviours can be managed. Whether they grow out or not is I think it's finding a very good way of managing the behaviour that reduces the behaviour to a more disruptive, for want of a better word, level. I'm not sure. I think children do grow out of certain behaviours. It's the background to what the behaviour is as well. So yet again, that would be more a clinical diagnosis, I guess, that then would support an intervention.
Our learning disability team are really good at kind of unpicking some of these cases where they look at what age the child should be developing at, what's the normal age of developing and what the delay is, and are they likely to achieve that, you know, in a number of years? How behind are they, and how much should it just be parenting skills? Because this is a normal problem that somebody else would experience for a child who's at this particular age or it's developmentally at that age. And then when it becomes a more significant problem where you're going to have to intervene. So I found our learning disability team, to be really good at directing us with those types of cases.
And behaviours of concern can be a communication of an unmet need. So it might be an unmet need when a child is younger, and then they've got a different unmet need when they're older, when things around them have changed or they're going through transition. So I don't know about growing in and out. Things change, don't they, with support and services around people.
What is really good is that a lot of behaviours that, you know, my experience, you know, in this fairly short time really has been a lot of behavioural issues have been addressed by strategies. And sometimes things that people thought were not possible, even some of the parents that have attended the parenting groups in our areas that have really thought that they've had a major problem on the hand, with the right strategies and maybe some parenting skills that they've been taught, they've been able to overcome some of those. So sometimes there is another solution that people just have to experience that before for themselves.
Great, thank you. I was just looking at some of the other questions in the comments, and there is a kind of a sister guide to the one that we've published today. It's been out for a little while, that looks at assessing for behaviours of concern. So if it kind of fits quite nicely alongside the design guide, which has come out today. So one last question, trying to keep up with them, but any thoughts on challenging referrals for additional bedrooms for children? And I suppose kind of in Blackburn, Heather, do you have a lot of calls for separate bedrooms for siblings where they're kind of struggling to share a bedroom?
Yeah, we have had quite a number of cases similar to this. And again, our process is currently that we would usually access other teams that might be involved, or get them involved, like the learning disability team, to see again if that behaviour can be addressed, and just making sure that the reason that they can't share is due to a condition that they have, that their behaviour is related to something that's going on for them that's not going to resolve in any other way. And then rehousing is often looked at, but again, we've talked about the challenges of rehousing, and we certainly have that in Blackburn as well. There's lots of smaller houses that might be available, but not ones for larger families. And certainly in our area, we tend to find that families have children, like more than one children with needs as well. So that can make it challenging.
Mm-hmm. And Coral, from your perspective at kind of the foundation, is what's your kind of thought on bedroom sharing and suitability and kind of adaptation versus kind of changes in behaviour?
Well, I think it's part of a package, isn't it? It's not just one thing, isn't it? And it's an interesting comment someone's put in the chat that parents are often reluctant to try strategies. They want to go straight to restrictive solutions. But I think that's because it's coming too late. I think by the time you guys will get involved, families are often on their knees. They're desperate. They're absolutely near to crisis point. So they're desperate for anything that might be able to help them. And putting strategy in place is a longer term thing, isn't it? And needs to start early on. So it's really important to get that early support, early intervention. But it also is a bit of a combination. We sometimes find sort of teams go in and suggest sort of a behaviour support program around perhaps toileting. But if you haven't got sort of the toileting facilities to support that, you can't do one without the other. Or if someone's got toileting issues and you've got sort of carpeting throughout your house, and you can't do one without the other, can you? They've got to come together. And I think it's about joining things up and having things together. And before families are on their absolute desperate needs. So likewise with the bedroom, it's about, there might be other strategies. Each situation is really different, isn't it, on this one? I mean, families aren't going to ask for a second bedroom unless they're absolutely desperate for some solutions.
And also sleep. We see sleep can be such an issue for some people that sleep deprivation is not to be underestimated, because realistically, if you're putting in suggestions to manage, to support a family to manage behaviour, and they haven't slept for more than 3 hours in the last,
absolutely,
it's like it's ridiculous that I know it's like when you don't sleep, you can't do anything, can you? Never mind trying to do a really consistent approach. So I think sometimes that's why we see the thing about wanting additional bedrooms, is because of the impact on maybe other siblings who are then having to go to school, haven't slept either. So a whole subject, we could talk about sleep for hours. It's one of my things we see a lot, we have to think about a lot. So,
and if the sibling is tired, the parent is then managing a tired sibling as well as the individual with learning disabilities, as well as their own tiredness. And it's you're setting yourself all up to, it's not great, is it?
No. Well, thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I think we've kind of pretty much just scratched the surface, haven't we, in terms of all the issues and complexities. And I think kind of the key things that you've kind of pulled out is, or kind of hopefully we could this afternoon, is a new design guide on the Foundation's website, which looks at a range of adaptations that can be done in certain circumstances, and it's kind of very much the start point that we'll be building on with more kind of case studies as we go forwards. I think kind of second thing that's really come out is that it's definitely kind of a multidisciplinary topic, and that you need kind of a range of professionals involved, which in itself can always be challenging, particularly when there are waiting lists for the services. But that there is a community of practice and a kind of online support group for professionals working in this area. You can join us via the Foundation's networks. It's a very active group, and if this is an area of work that you're actively involved in, then I think hopefully you've found that this afternoon it would be really worth joining, and some of the conversations that I suppose we just had over the last few minutes are done in much more detail over in that support group. So please do join if you feel that would be useful. But for this afternoon, thank you to Coral, Diane, Heather and Mark for joining us and sharing your expertise.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Foundations Live.
Right, we're nearly at the end for today. So thank you to all our speakers for joining us, and thank you to all of you for adding so many questions and comments into the chat. Hope you found that useful. I say, please do join our networks if you find that kind of thing useful. We, as well as the networks, we have network meetings, which I guess are kind of a bit like this, but so for technical officers, caseworkers, OTs, managers across different regions of the country, and we've also started two new communities of practice, one around local government reorganisation. So if you're going through that process and you would find it useful to discuss with other colleagues from across the country, you can join that group. And there's another one if you're looking to write a housing assistance policy, so you can be part of a group with other people across the country who are also developing their policies. We've got more Foundations Lives coming up. If I can find the right thing to click on, there we go. So we've got a special Foundations Live on the 19th of August, which is looking at Foundation Housing Without Delay, which is kind of the third part of the Without Delay series. There are minor adaptations without delay, then adaptations without delay, and this is the third one, is Housing Without Delay, that we're working on with the Royal College of OTs and Closemat. Then on the 2nd of September, we'll have a Foundations Live looking at the various CPD opportunities that are available from different manufacturers and suppliers, and they can kind of come in and buy your lunch and go through their CPD offerings. And then on the 16th of September, we'll have a Foundations Live on the home adaptations installer network, reminding you what that's all about in terms of registering contractors, having your own local list of contractors that's kind of free of charge and managed for you. And we'll have some case studies from some of the early adopter local authorities. You will hopefully also be aware that there's currently a live consultation from the government on DFG allocations and the proposed new formula, which is live at the moment. And that consultation ends in September. And we're hoping to do another session where the government statisticians will come along and introduce that to you in early September. So just finalising the details on that. But hopefully, if you're interested in the new allocations formula, we'll have a Foundations Live for you on that fairly shortly. Just a reminder, please do nominate yourself for the National Healthy Housing Awards. A, it's a really good day out. B, it really helps to raise your profile locally. And so certainly kind of all the winners I spoke to in the past, it's really helped them to either gain more funding or maintain the funding that they've had. And I think it's kind of really good to share. If you're doing good things, share it and be rewarded for it. So please do consider the Healthy Housing Awards for this year. And yeah, just a reminder that we will be on tour again with the road shows: Southampton, Wolverhampton, Liverpool, Sheffield, and London in September and October. And really excited to play the DFG Champions board game, which I think hopefully, if you come along and you like it, we'd like to get lots produced and handed out across the country, because I think it'd be a really useful tool. So in terms of feedback, hopefully you found this afternoon useful. You'll get an email afterwards with this link on to give any feedback. And if you want a CPD certificate, include your email address, and that will ping back to you. So I think that's just about all for this afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. I think we've had quite a bumper attendance today. Thank you for all your comments. Really helps to make the afternoons flow. And we'll see you soon with adaptations without delay.